This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
What I think is missing in our society and why so many people are hurting is they've lost the idea of the natural course of life. Once you're born, you're gonna die at some point. Whatever that life cycle is for you, all of us are going to die. And to make this ugly stigma around it and make it an ugly and ungrateful thing is terrible.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Today I'm talking with home funeral director Glenda Villegas. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is National HME. National HME is a direct service hospice durable medical equipment company. Using their proprietary software, Hospice Cloud Pro, providers can enter new patient information, order equipment, arrange pickups, and obtain real-time reporting, including order status and much more. National HME excels at providing service with care and empathy. To learn more, visit nationalhme.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Odonata Care. Odonata's motto is, "Care is treatment." They have a mission to transform the end-of-life experience for the patient and caregivers through education and support. Odonata Care is revolutionizing the hospice experience with their booklet, The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient, along with 50 free YouTube videos that teach the basics of bedside care. Visit thecareplan.net for more information. Now, here's today's episode.
So this is a topic that I have wanted to talk about for a long time, and this woman reached out to us, Glenda Villegas, and dropped this, "Hey, I want to collaborate with you," invitation into my lap, and I'm like, this is perfect because I want to talk about home funerals. Glenda is a retired Master Sergeant from the U.S. Air Force. She decided that she would serve her community through death care services after she retired from the Air Force and after experiencing the loss of her dad. She first learned and worked in the pre-need cemetery sales, where you're dealing with people who are buying and making plans in advance of a death. And then she moved on to family services, where she learned how to care for families and counsel them after the death had occurred. She says she learned the industry inside and out, and she wanted to do something different. So she became a licensed funeral director in California, and she wanted to educate about the laws related to death care. There's a lot of confusion, misinformation out there, and she also wanted to offer them the option of a home funeral experience. So today, Glenda teaches families about how to care for their dead, helps them to facilitate the healing process of grief in a positive manner through home funerals. So here's my conversation with home funeral director Glenda Villegas. Glenda, it's so great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today.
Well, we're going to dive in to our content. We're going to be talking about home funerals and the work that you do. But just to get to know you a little bit on the personal side, I'm going to ask you sort of an icebreaker question. This is a surprise for you.
Sure.
You didn't know this in advance. If you could only have one color of clothes in your closet, what color would that be?
Green.
Oh, wow.
I know. I noticed.
Yeah, that's a little unusual, but why green?
Green has been my favorite color for a long time. My eyes are green. And this sounds crazy, but when I was in the Air Force, when we were in our BDUs, battle dress uniforms, they were green, different colors of green. And I just liked the way I looked in it.
I like
I know
that.
that's silly, but
no, that's not silly because I like the way I look in blue, and that's that's my favorite color. So that's good. It makes you feel confident. I love that.
yeah.
That's nice. I wasn't expecting that. I have to tell you, there was a little part of me thought, okay, she's a funeral director. She would say that all her clothes should be black.
Well, when I first started and I was within the industry, everything was black. When I moved out of the industry, I have nothing but color.
Yeah, you get to wear the colors. So let's talk about that. What inspired you to start working in the death care industry? Because you have a military background. You were in the Air Force.
Right.
Yeah. What was the impetus for your start in the death care industry?
So, in December of 2015, I retired from the military. Well, retired from the Air Force after over 20 years of service. And the entire time that I was in was a very busy time in my life. Busy with my husband, busy with my son, and traveling and mission focused. That's all I was, mission focused. I always thought I would have more time to go home and visit my family in Indiana, and especially my dad. We were hunting buddies, and we spent a lot of time together. And what I did is I feel like, well, I tried to surprise my dad. So I thought, I won't tell him I'm coming to visit him. And then after Christmas in 2015, I was like, I'm going to show up in January of 2016 and surprise him. Well, January 5th of 2016, my dad had a major stroke. And he wouldn't fully recover from that stroke. And he died in November 27th, 2017. And that just rocked my world because my father was everything to me. We were very close, and he taught me how to hunt and fish. We had, I grew up on a small farm in Indiana. You can imagine how close we were. He taught me everything I know about cars. I'm probably the only female. Well, I am the only female my husband met that could change her own tires. So,
Yeah.
it hit me hard. And the defining experience for me was flying back to Indiana and being in grief, being just so numb and just not being able to really function. And I just swiped that credit card, took money out of the bank, anything that my family needed at that time. And I felt, looking back, very taken advantage of in that moment when I look back at things. And what I decided was, once I was able to calm down, refocus on life, was I'm going to move forward. I'm going to get into the industry, and I'm going to be the difference for family members. And I'm not going to let any family that comes across my path to be taken advantage of in the way that I was. And that is what really catapulted me into this.
I'm sure a lot of people have that same experience where the grief is so heavy, you really can't carry and process those business pieces that have to happen when you're planning a funeral, when you're taking care of those, disposition of the body and what were his wishes and how do you want to do this and how much are you willing to spend? And I'm sure there are a lot of people that grief covers all of that, clouds it. And then, of course, you add in things like, what were the family dynamics like? Was there guilt? How close were you to this person? And I'm sure it does affect. And let's face it, the funeral industry is a business. When you go to a funeral home, it's a business, right? They're in the business of making money. I mean, hospice is very similar, very similar. Okay, so you started off in pre-need sales.
Right.
So you were working one-on-one with families, and then you moved to family services. So tell me a little bit about the work that you did with family services. What did that entail?
So with family services, the reason I made the move is I wanted to serve families more intimately, at the time of death. So I moved from a pre-need where before anything has happened to now something has happened. They're coming through the door just like I did. And some of them didn't have any plans made. Some of them had one plot bought, but they didn't know that there was opening and closing, that they needed a vault, that all these other things that stack on top of it. And what I found is I could be the person that sat down across the table from the family and honor them in the space and the emotions that they were at that moment and guide them through getting what they needed, asking them if there's anything more that they wanted. But I was not going to be the person that said, don't you think your father or your mother deserves a better place? I mean, this is by the road. Don't you really want to have a better place where you and your family can be buried right next to them? I have this private estate right over here. And I would serve families and build based on what they had. And what it led to is my heart was growing, the more families that I served and served with a heart-centered passion, the more I got in trouble at work. I'd get called into the office and then they would say, your sales are smaller here. You should have sold more here. We know this family. You should have sold more there.
Right.
And my comment back to them was, that's not what the family wanted at the time. That might be what you want, but that's not what the family wanted. And as the time passed, that I got sick of getting written up and called into the office. And I started putting an intention out there. Lord, bring to me the person or people that I need in my life to direct me in a more heart-centered way of serving families. And then that's what led into, I met Eric Putt and Elizabeth Putt, who owned and operated Threshold's home family-directed funerals. And Eric Putt is the one that trained me on how to facilitate a home funeral, talk to families about those options, and educate families on what their actual rights are for, at least here in California, what their rights are for the disposition of the body. Because as you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of you got to get them picked up right now. No, you don't. You got to call a funeral director. In the state of California, you are not required to use a funeral director. It's this big shuffling of people and mindset towards use the business side, use the business, and people are geared. They're programmed and geared to move that way. But it's not a fit for everyone.
No.
Many people, it doesn't serve.
So let's talk about the misinformation that surrounds the laws and, forgive the expression, processing of a body and taking care of a body after death. Because California's not the only one that's confusing that way. I hear this from people who deal with this all over the country. The laws are confusing. And most people, because we like to avoid getting too far into the weeds as humans when we have someone in our family die, it's easy to hand this off to a funeral director and say, well, you know the laws, you know the rules, just tell me how much it is and let's go from there. But that's cookie cutter. And we don't have to do it that way. And I think there's a growing movement to get back to something natural. I see more conversations about home funerals and green burials and human composting. And it's really encouraging because you get this individualized service, this individualized care that is about that family, is about the wishes of that person. So give me an example of what's required for just a few bullet points about what's required in California what can you do? You're saying you don't have to immediately pick up the body. What other laws are there that people are so confused about?
Yeah, one of the biggest is, oh, you have to have, because I was trained this way when I first entered the industry, I would give all these military veteran burial benefit seminars for the company I worked for. And they were like, make sure you point out they've got the cemetery, but they don't have the funeral. So I was trained to tell people, you need a funeral director, funeral home to pick you up. That's the piece you don't have, the transportation. But what I learned later was that was not true. Yes, they needed transportation to the National Cemetery or their final internment. But I found that in the state of California, you're not required to call a funeral director. If you have the right of disposition, you have full control over that body. You have the right to transport that body to its final destination, to include taking it to your home and keeping it there until you're ready to take it. There's no law that says you must have the body interred within 3 days or 4 days or 5 days. That law in California does not exist. And there's no law that states that you must use a funeral director. It says right there in the California Consumer Guide for Funeral and Cemetery, under the home death care section, it states that the only thing that you have to do, well, there's 4 things you have to do. You have to coordinate with the cemetery or whatever the final destination is, or the final internment. You have to register the death of the state of California and the burial permit, and then call the coroner and let them know that this death has occurred. Most people that I've dealt with are dying at home and through hospice care. So hospice, helps the family out with what they need up until the time of death. And then the family can choose, if they know the laws, to say thank you and then take it from there.
Right.
And that's what's so beautiful, because that's a much more meaningful, much more beautiful experience. And what I think is missing in our society and why so many people are hurting is they've lost the idea of the natural course of life. Once you're born, you're going to die at some point. Whatever that life cycle is for you, all of us are going to die. And to make this ugly stigma around it and make it an ugly and ungrateful thing is terrible. I look at it and I think, think about this. What if God allowed you to stay awake a little bit while you're still in your body, but your body's dead, just so you can see what's going on? How are you going to feel when those strangers pick you up? Wouldn't you rather stay at home and let people, this is me. If I was that dead body and I still had a conscious in there, just so I could see what was going on around me at my time of death, I would want people, even that I didn't get along with, to have the ability to come say whatever it is they had to say to me, even though I'm dead, in a private area, something that's comfortable where they can sit down, not something that is where everybody, you're on view for 4 hours, usually on a viewing. They embalm the body and they put it out for viewing, and then the public gets to come in. The experience that I have had with other family members that have home funerals is when they have their loved one at home, they can involve children, because children grieve too. Pets go through the grieving process when their owner dies, when one of their family, and so many times people leave out their pets. One instance, if I can go on, one instance of a home funeral that really impacted me was this couple had been married for over 42 years, and she kept her husband at home. And then once he passed, she kept him at home. He stayed in his hospital bed. We came in and put the dry ice under because she had arthritis and didn't have a lot of good use of her hands. And she sat by her husband, and every day we would check in with her and see how she's doing. She goes, oh, well, the care team has already come in and everybody said their goodbyes. His dog, his Chihuahua that he had, she put the Chihuahua up on top of him and let it lay there next to him. And that you could see the dog was grieving.
Mm-hmm.
It was grieving. It knew that its dad was dead. And you could see the little dog going through his own grief. And she let that dog stay there. She let that dog go through its process. And then there were some great-grandchildren that came in, and they got to say goodbye to their pop-pop, and in a private way, and they wrote him letters and colored in pictures and put them in his hands. That is moving. And some people chose not to come in. It was too much for some people, and that's okay. There was a couple people that were in his life from the church that wanted to look through the window, but didn't want to come into the house.
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite interesting. And I get the chance to see it unfold because I'm the facilitator, but I'm not the director. I give families ideas, but I don't direct them in any one direction because I want them to do what is in their heart. What do they need? And for this particular woman who had been married, she'd been married to him since she got out of high school. They built a wonderful life together. They traveled the world together. They had a lot of memories. She kept him home for 5 days before we took him to the crematory. And she wanted to be the one that went there with him and stayed there until he was done. She said, I don't want you to pick him up. I want to be the one to be here. So we got the paperwork together, and they allowed her to stay there and wait till the whole processing was over, and she took him home. Then a few days later, she called me and she said, Glenda, I can't transfer him into the urn that I got for both of us. I need your help. She was having trouble physically and emotionally, so I went to her house and I did the transfer for her and sat there and talked to her and had coffee and tea until she felt better. And then I left, because that's what I consider my service. And she wrote me the most beautiful letter. A few months later, I get a letter from her thanking me for allowing her to be herself and to do what she needed to do, because she was retired from the state of California as a 911 dispatcher. And she had a lot of trauma in her life where she felt she couldn't trust people. And the other funeral directors and homes that she had called before wouldn't even work with her. And she goes, she was called crazy. She was told that she wasn't, going to be able to do that. So that letter, is one of those letters that I refer to when I'm, having a down day or whatever. I look back at that letter and go, I need to push through because this work needs to continue.
The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is National HME. National HME is a direct service hospice durable medical equipment company that's serious about providing excellent service through communication and coordination for providers and families. They aim to be an extension of the hospice care team and to make DME the easiest part of the hospice provider's day. Using their proprietary software, Hospice Cloud Pro, providers can enter new patient information, order equipment, arrange pickups, and obtain real-time reporting on their order status, plus much more. National HME also provides text message notifications which keep everyone up to date on when the equipment will be delivered. National understands how important communication is when it comes to every aspect of a hospice patient's care. Here's Chris Maglioka, Senior Vice President of Business Development, describing how National HME technicians stay connected with patients and families.
The family will know through text messaging when the technician's on their way. They'll actually know the technician's name. So, we get the order, our call center calls that patient's family and lets them know, we received the order from the hospice, we'll be out there this afternoon. The technician will contact you with an ETA, and then again, they're going to get that next phone call plus a text message from the technician introducing themselves, letting them know who they are, and then with their ETA. It all starts and ends with the communication part.
National HME does more than just provide equipment. They provide service with care and empathy. To learn more about the services provided by National HME, you can visit their website at nationalhme.com. The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is Odonata Care. Odonata Care founders Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire are certified hospice and palliative nurses with over 40 years combined experience. They are experts in end-of-life care. Nancy and Brenda have created a 32-page booklet called The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient. Their goal is to empower patients and their caregivers with valuable information right at their fingertips, wherever and whenever they need it. Odonata Care also offers a suite of 50 free training videos on YouTube that teaches the basics of bedside care for personal and professional caregivers. Odonata Care's motto is "Care is treatment," which is why their bottom line is caring for the patient. Nancy and Brenda have a mission to transform the end-of-life experience through education and support. You can purchase copies of the Care Plan for yourself or your hospice agency at thecareplan.net. And look for their new Spanish version coming to their online store very soon. Now, back to today's episode.
I'm so struck by this. So there's a difference between a facilitator and a director. And it's just a very subtle nuance. So we talk a lot about patient-centered care in healthcare, right? In hospice, everything's about the patient. The patient is at the center of what we do. It's the same way for the funeral industry, the death care industry. That person who's died and their wishes and the family's wishes, that's at the center of everything that you do. It shouldn't be driven or directed by someone else. It should be facilitated. So basically what you are doing is providing them with the tools, providing them with information, knowledge, support, and resources so that they can do this the way they want to do it. I think that's amazing. And I can imagine it's very meaningful. So what are some of the personal touches that you've seen that have been used for home funerals?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because each new home funeral is a new experience. All families have different family dynamics and cultures. And I really want to talk about the Baha'i faith because I wasn't familiar with them until I did a home funeral. And this home funeral, wow, everybody from their church was involved. They had schedules to people come over and clean the house. They had people bringing food, and they were sitting all around. They placed this beautiful soul who had passed away after many years. She was in her 90s when she passed, and they placed her in the middle of the room instead of against a wall. And they put beanbag chairs out. They put little kids, like educational rugs on the floor with little cars and stuff for the kids that was coming, and boxes of crayons and construction paper. They had markers, and we put her in what's called an alternative container. It's cardboard. It's what most people choose to be cremated in. It's a cremation container. It's just rough cardboard, hard cardboard. And we lined it with her favorite satin sheets because she loved satin sheets. And we put the pillows on the bottom, and we put some of her favorite roses in there. She was a person who loved to grow roses for the church and for people, and we just give them away. And she had the most beautiful giant roses. I mean, these things were huge, and they smelled. She had rows that were lined and labeled to, these are the fragrant ones, and these are the unfragrant ones, because it was crazy. I didn't even know some roses didn't even have a fragrance to them. The church member said, "Oh no, Miss Glenda, she loved to give everybody roses. And when you said, I don't have flowers in my house because I'm allergic to flowers," she goes, "I have a flower for you." Because she wanted to put flowers in everybody's life. So there were roses everywhere. And they invited people in. The family, just 24 hours a day, they let whoever come in from the church or family, friends, or community people that this lady was part of their life. And they wanted to have a lot of food there so they could feed everybody when they came in. And it was just they played her favorite songs, and she loved happy music, like They didn't play anything somber. It was happy music. And these musicians from church, they came over and they would take turns sitting there and playing her favorite songs and singing. And they were really celebrating the love and the light that she brought into other people's lives. And one of the things that I got back from after this was all done, they kept her home for 5 days. And on the 6th day, we took her to her final resting place at a local cemetery. I will tell you, I thought, wow, we're keeping her home. They weren't using air conditioning. And I thought, oh no, can the dry ice really do this long? But you know what? I learned from the Baha'i faith people on a special way to wash the body with a rose oil and not just rose water, and how to use roses. Roses are their thing. And they really taught me something on that home funeral. So that's something I take away too, is every home funeral I do, every cultural interaction that I have with other cultures and faiths, I learn something new, and it goes in my book, this is what I've learned. And I was really surprised. It still shocks me today. She always smelled like roses. Even when we put her in the ground, she smelled like roses.
Amazing.
And there was no embalming. There was no, all we used was the dry ice. And that one sticks out in my mind just because of the joy. And I learned so much about roses and rose oil at that time.
How meaningful is that? You learn the whole time you serve, which is an amazing thing to be able to do. One of the things that strikes me, this is the business part of things. So you said that this particular woman was buried, and you guys also offer cremation. So just because someone has a home funeral, has a visitation or a vigil at the house, doesn't mean that a funeral home still can't take them to be cremated or they still can't be buried. I think I really hadn't thought that through, but a funeral home can still help with that piece, can't they?
Right, they can. And, if you don't have a home funeral guide in your area, you have a right to talk to the funeral director. Even in the 9 states that require a funeral director to say, hey, this is how I'm going to run things. I'm going to be in control. I will call you when I need for you to remove, but I don't want embalming. I don't, make the list of things that are important to you and just put it out on the table and say, if we can do business together, great. If we can't, I'm moving to the next one.
Right.
Because there will be someone out there that will work with you. And they're going to learn something too. That funeral director that's pushing back is probably pushing back because they don't know any better. They've never, I get this all the time when I go back to Indiana, because Indiana is one of the states that requires you to have a funeral director, and they push embalming really hard. Even my family are like, Glenda, you're weird. You're weird. And I'm like, no, I'm not weird.
No, just different.
Yeah. And you know what? But I'm not different. Because I have a very, very faint memory of my great-grandfather, Cyril Russell Cottrell, having a home funeral.
Really?
Yeah, I have I must have been really, really little. And my mom goes, I don't know how you remember that stuff. She goes, there's no way you can remember that. Someone told you. My mom doesn't believe that I can remember it. Yeah, because home funerals is what we always did in Indiana, in the other states. If you look at your architectural design of your house, you will probably find a parlor in it. And what is a parlor used for? It's where they knew you were going to present the dead.
Yeah, a person was laid out, a lot of times on a door, some type of planking, but a lot of times on a door. Yeah, that was the norm several generations ago. We've industrialized it, so it's very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And taking the personalizing out of it, because the funeral is for the living. It's not for the dead.
True.
And what we've gotten away from is true to traditions of participation. And sometimes people, I'll give you an example. One of the ladies that I helped with recently, she had a small home funeral, and just a couple days later, we took her husband to the crematory. She got offended when people wanted to bring food. And I said, don't be offended. They're not bringing you food because they think you're weak or that you can't, because she's a really tough Army woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, they just think I'm weak and that I'm not going to get over this. I said, no, that's not it. They loved your husband and they want to do something. It's the last act of kindness and love. They know he can never repay them for this act of kindness. And for some of those that have some guilty feelings, it's going to help mitigate that guilt. Anything that's festering in the live person when someone passes in our life, one of the things that home death care or any kind of funeral ritual does, the more we participate, the more we process our grief.
Absolutely.
And that's what I hear back from people too. I really hear back from people, I'm so glad I did it. Some people are freaked out when it's their first time because their family pushes so hard.
Sure.
You can get a lot of backlash over it. But it's really about the person and the people that are living. And it's really no one's business but the family.
Right. They have the right to make that choice.
Yeah, they have the right. Most of the time, what I find is people don't know what their rights are, and they're afraid of getting in trouble.
Right. They think it's illegal somehow.
Right. And it's not. Even hospice nurses, I am floored. I am just floored by how many hospice nurses think it's illegal for a family to possess their own dead.
True. I was one of those nurses, probably not to the point where I thought it was illegal, but I thought it was very odd. And I had to be educated. And this was a few years in to my hospice nursing career. But again, it goes back to education. And we've industrialized this and separated ourselves from death. And that includes how our folks die, because instead of dying at home, so many people die in the hospital. And yet most of them don't want to. 86% of people in older age groups will tell you, I want to die at home.
Right.
But the way we have medicalized death, we're removed from it. And you would think on some level that makes it easier, right? We're disconnected from all the nastiness of it, the nitty gritty of death and the sadness, the bad part of things. And then the body's just taken away and the funeral home manages it. It's very sanitary. And yet, what do we know? That those death rituals, the washing of the body, post-mortem care, having a home funeral, having a vigil and a visitation that is, accessible to everyone and not confined to those 2 hours or 4 hours, it very much nurtures our grief and helps us move through grief in a healthier manner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're unlearning is what I really think, Glenda. I think we're unlearning a lot of things about who we are as humans and how we end our lives. We're slow learners when it comes to this, truly.
Yeah.
So let's get really personal. One of my questions was, what would be your personal choice for your after-death care, traditional versus home funeral? And of course, I figure I know the answer, but I'm asking anyway.
Definitely the home funeral. I know that some of my family, I ain't going, whatever. But my mom's one of 13. I have a huge family in Indiana, just a monster-sized family. Love them all. I haven't seen them very much, over the years because I've been traveling around. But I would very much like to be laid out so that anybody who wants to come and say goodbye to me can. Write me letters, throw them in there. I learned from the Buddhist faith, you write something down, burn it, or you get the little paper on, like little outfits made out of paper or cars or houses, you burn them on this one holiday and it shows up on the other side for the person. So I like the idea of taking from other faiths and making it a lot of fun. I also would like to be taken, after a certain amount of days, whatever my family needs, straight to the National Cemetery in a pine coffin, just like my great-grandparents and, all of them before. I love the idea of the pine box. Something simple that returns to the earth. I really like the idea of returning to the earth. And I know that there is a whole bunch of podcasts we could do on natural burial. I have been trying to talk my husband into being okay with me being composted, and he's just no.
That's pretty out there, and I think people are really, they struggle with that. They absolutely struggle with that because it's the idea of the decomposition. But I'm with you, and I have kind of introduced that subject to my family as well, my kids and my husband, and they are like, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
That is so gross. I've seen horror movies and NCIS where that's happening. But I think with education, we're going to normalize some of these things and to be able to offer people more of a choice. I want to have that choice for myself. The funeral and any music and that kind of thing, I will leave that for something that nurtures my family and comforts them. But I get to decide where my body goes and how. And I think everybody should get to make that decision for themselves. And if other people think it's weird, well, that's cool. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I want to point out to family members is think about this on a home funeral, especially if you've been married for 30, 40, 50 years. Okay. For me, I will have my husband in a home funeral if he passes before me. And it's because I know I'm going to wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I want to be able to either go into the room where he's at, or I might just sleep in there, because it's going to be a big adjustment because he's my best friend. So I would like people to think about, when you do lose your spouse or you lose your parent, you are going to wake up in the middle of the night. And if a funeral home has them, the way that we have traditional funeral homes today, you're not going to have access to the body. And that's what's my driving force with this home funeral, is the family has access to the body 24 hours a day, anytime that they want. It's about them. And every person that I have done a home funeral with, I don't say for, I say with.
Yeah.
They wake up in the middle of the night. I always have stories that I hear from them. And that's what I want people to embrace, is death is part of life. It's part of the cycle of life. We're all about the birth, all bringing babies in and doing that, but we've gotten away from embracing the death. That's a celebration and an ending. And we need to embrace it more so we're not so traumatized by it.
Right.
That's what I want.
I love that idea of having access. If you wanted to go sleep on the couch in there, to make it more of a transition.
Right.
And less of this abrupt lurch, this horrible drop off of someone who's been so important, this relationship and role that's been so important to you, but a transition of easing. Death itself takes an instant, that last breath and that last heartbeat. So why does the rest of it have to be this immediate jump? Why can't it be a transition? Stay for a while.
Right.
When you've spent 40, 50 years with someone, they've kept you company. You've been through things together. Let's do this together for at least a little while.
Right.
And then I'll let you go. I can't go where you're going, but let's do this together for just a little bit. And then it'll ease it for me and I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Not saying that the grief ends because we do it this way. You carry it forward. But what a beautiful transition. I like that. So, Glenda, what's one thing that we haven't talked about that you would like my listeners to know about home funerals?
Okay, so I want all home funeral people to know no matter what state you're in, all funeral directors that have funeral homes have to publish a general pricing list. It's required. Mine's posted on my website. However, as long as I'm financially able to not turn people away, I will always help those. Everybody deserves a dignified goodbye. I have friends that are still in the cemetery business. I can help people with that as well. I want to give this out there. Recently, I took care of a woman who was 55 and died in downtown San Diego. She died, in my opinion, the family thought she was a drug addict and this and that, but she didn't die of drugs. She died for lack of access to heart medication and diabetic medication that she desperately needed. That's what she died from. And so she left behind a 17-year-old and a 25-year-old with no help.
Wow.
I helped those girls. And luckily, one of the girls was an employee of a company that had grief assistance, or what do you call it when an emergency happens? Catastrophic help for the employees. So I used that and I volunteered my time for the rest of it to make sure that way these girls they weren't in debt. I was there to serve them and their family. And there were some shouting matches because they're young. They don't know. They're young.
Right.
And there's a lot of people feeding into them. But I stood in the gap between them and possible financial ruin, because one of them would have ran her credit cards all the way until she ran up whatever she had, because she just was out of state and felt very guilty about what happened to her mother. And I said, no. I said, this is not your fault. Let me help you. Follow my lead. Let me help you. And she turned a corner, and she did. She allowed me to help her. And she's processing things even today. I'll get phone calls from her. And then it's been over 7 months since I had this case. And one of the daughters still reaches out to me and says, thank you for not letting me jump off that financial cliff. Because she's back into college and she's back into her life. And the other one just entered college. It's the money that it takes to bury someone is crazy out here. I know that some of the states, they have lower thresholds, but out here it's starting at $18,000 for a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And some people's faith require them to have a burial, or they believe they're going to go to hell, and that's not fair. That's not fair to the individual, and that's not fair to the person that died, So, that's what I want to leave everybody with is taxes, marriages, and death are the three most expensive things that you will have in your life. That's what they say we spend the most money on. I see grieving people, like before I left the what I call mainstream industry, I saw grieving people who felt guilt that would spend upwards of $30,000, $40,000 on the funeral.
Oh,
and
wow.
80, 90, 100,000 on the cemetery side, just because they felt so guilty about what happened.
Yeah.
Your dollars are not going to fix your grief. The dollars are not going to fix the grief.
Yeah.
I know that firsthand because I swiped my credit card and paid, and it didn't fix my grief. That was not the answer. I didn't know any better, but it wasn't the answer.
I think that's a good thing for people to take away from our interview today. Glenda, how can listeners connect with you and see the work that you're doing?
They can take a look on my website, but that's a very basic website I have. I would encourage them to reach out to me through email or my phone number. My phone number is on my website. I have 2 emails set aside that they can reach out to me. I have a personal email for those that are like, I need you now, and I can give that to you where you can put it in the show notes, or I can just tell you outright what it is.
Yeah, tell me what it is, and then we'll add it in.
Okay. My personal email is V as in Victor, Glenda, Glenda, 79 @gmail.com. And my direct phone line is 505 269-3335. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has, doesn't matter what state you're from. If I'm not familiar with the laws, I'll look them up right at the same time and help you find them so that there's no miscommunication. And anything I can do, if it's within my power to help you with, I will help you.
Nice, nice. Glenda, thank you so much for sharing yourself, sharing your experience and your wisdom today. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you so much. It's my privilege to be here. Thank you.
So now you know a little bit about Glenda's story, how she got to this place where some people would think is a weird option, right? A home funeral director. But her experience after her dad died wasn't a pleasant one. And what she's not saying is that she racked up a lot of debt. She said she swiped her credit card over and over and over just to take care of those funeral expenses. And she didn't want other people to have that same experience. So here she is years later. She's become a funeral director. And now she's serving families in her community, offering them home funeral services, facilitating that. She's not pushing families to upgrade services or buy more than they need. It's more about personalization. Make it individualized, make it a good fit. So she's teaching about the rights of disposition of a body. She wanted to help families know what they could and could not do. I learned from her because as a hospice nurse, very seldom, I think maybe only once or twice, have I been involved with a family that wanted to keep a dead loved one at home after the death. So facilitating, not directing, right? The family directs it. In turn, she's received all these gifts of seeing these cultures and faith rituals, Buddhist rituals that she talked about. And I think it was Baha'i, which I'm not familiar with, the different rituals, bathing the body with rose oil, just some amazing cultural things that she gets to experience that had her career been different, she wouldn't have been able to experience at all. So it's amazing. One of the things about home funerals and this more gentle transition that a home funeral provides is the processing of grief in, I think, a softer, less abrupt way. Death is abrupt the way we do it. It's sterilized, medicalized, machined, it's mechanized. When what it is personal, it's cultural, it's a community, it's a psychosocial, emotional event because we're human. It's a human event. Home funerals are a great way to respect who we are as humans. And it's a return to the traditional methods of experiencing a death and processing it and memorializing our dead. So I'll put some links in the show notes to Glenda's website. You can connect with her and her contact information will be there. You can see the work she's doing and learn from her experience. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.